بحمد ربي أبدأ المنيرة ثم الصلاة والسلام السيرة على نبي اسمه محمد أبوه عبد الله منه مفرد
أبوه عبد الله منه مفرد.
بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Amma ba'd. Firstly, I greet you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And I welcome you to our seerah lessons. I'll be discussing a book by Sheikh Dr. Ali bin Muhammad al-Salabi. As you can see, a very, very interesting book on the seerah, very comprehensive book on the seerah. And for me, the most important part of it is the lessons that he specifically alludes to after the discussions. Unfortunately, our time is very short and I won't be able to go into a very detailed discussion on the seerah. But for today's lesson, we're going to discuss Mecca and Arabia in general prior to the advent of the Rasul Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and some of the events that had taken place, the civilizations, the political situation at the time. So first and foremost, we touch on some of the empires that were dominant at the time, and this was prior to the advent of Islam. We all know the Roman Empire, which was dominant at the time, and they were pitted against the Persian Empire. This was around the 7th century AD, 7th century AD. And India also was a very strong power at the time. Now, between the three empires, there were a number of wars. There was back and forth between them. But what I think is most important to touch on is that Arabia at the time was in a very, very dark place, in the sense that nobody wanted to even try and colonize. Nobody wanted to wage war against Arabia because there was nothing to be had there. There was nothing to be gained. You must remember all these empires, be it the Roman or the Persian empires, India, they would have fought and waged war against other nations. They would have fought against other peoples, try to take over their lands because of what could have been gained from there, whether it was resources, whether it was manpower, people in the form of slavery, which was very common at the time. But with regards to the Arabs, I'm not going to say the Muslims, the Arabs prior to Islam, regardless of who they were after, the Arab nation in general prior to Islam was a very wayward nation, a very barbaric nation, what you would have referred to it at that stage or in those times as barbarians. Very scary, very dangerous, and something that as a new Muslim I want to touch on as well, the culture of the Arabs at the time. We had everything from they weren't wearing proper clothing. It was Arabian desert. It was generally very hot. You would see children right up to the ages of 7, 8 and 9 even running around the streets naked, no clothing. Women had tattoos on their faces. Men had tattoos. There were battle scars. You're talking mohawks, all kinds of hairstyles, and hygiene also was at its lowest ebb, I think. So as a new Muslim, I want everyone just to think about this point, that the Arabs in general were accustomed to tattoos. They were accustomed to a lot of wayward behavior. And when Islam came later on and they accepted Islam, those tattoos didn't go away, So I want everyone to think about it this way, that when you see a revert Muslim with some tattoos, or you see, I recently saw a video of a revert Muslim who obviously used to be either some type of a Satanist or some occult participant of whatever sort it may be, but he had so many tattoos all over his face, as words written. He even had like the triangle with the eye on his forehead. But Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, Back to our Arabian Peninsula, the dominant religions of the world at the time was Christianity in the Roman Empire. It was fire worship in the Persian Empire. In India, it was Hinduism, right? That was the standard religion throughout most of India. And paganism was a key religion. In fact, it was probably the religion in the Arabian Peninsula in general. There were sporadic pockets of Jews, there were sporadic pockets of Christians around. But for the most part, it was polytheism, idol worship, etc. In fact, the Sahaba used to recall days of Jahiliyyah where they would go on a journey and they'd have their little stone idol type of a thing that they would worship, and then they'd see a more beautiful looking stone and they'd throw this one aside and pick up a new one and take that, or they'd go on a journey and they'd forget their idol. Now this, any sane person would think like, oh, I forgot how do you forget God at home? Now what do I do? Now who do I worship? So make a mound of sand, pour camel's milk on it and worship that. Or they make a little deity with dates and kind of shape it into the form of a person and then put it down in front of them and worship that. And then he said that he got hungry, so he ate an arm. Then he got hungry again and he ate another arm and eventually eaten the entire little idol. We move on to the different civilizations of the Arab world in general, right? There was the civilization of Saba, which we normally know as Sheba in English. So the queen of Sheba, you may have heard, that was Bilqis, right? In Yemen, we had the civilization of Ad. This was like quite prehistoric. We had the civilization of Thamud. These are what are referred to as the Arab al-Arba, the original Arabs, not the Musta'arabin, those who became Arab later on. For instance, Bani Ismail, which is the tribe or the progeny of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, are from the Arabs that were Arabicized, because Ismail alayhi salatu wasalam wasn't an Arab technically, right? So the Arab nations then settled around the area where Ismail alayhi salatu wasalam was, and then they became Arabicized, right? So the original initial Arabs were those, the Thamud, the Ad, and the people of Saba, right? The overall condition of the Arabs prior to Islam was, as I explained, very pitiable. It was more like a tribal system, very many wars and battles in between. Like they would get drunk and then they would just decide, you know what, we're mounting, lock and load, put your sword on your side, arrows and in the quiver and the bow on your back, get on your camel or your horse, and we're going to attack a certain tribe. They would then pillage, rape, plunder, go crazy, take the women and children as slaves, whatever it was, and then go back to their land where the tribe was situated and go and celebrate. Couple of very interesting points that Dr. Salabi points out with regards to Arab society in general is that there was no limit to the degree to which nobility felt proud about their ancestry, right? So they would literally use the fact that they come from a certain tribe and lineage as a reason to consider themselves better than others. And sadly, I must tell you, the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam states that Jahiliyyah will return to the world and it will become as common as it used to be. And holding on to your deen would be like holding on to a burning coal. We're living in a time where people literally boast about which family they're from, which tribe they're from, which home they come from. In fact, it's gone to such a state where if you can't boast about the money that you make or the car that you drive or the home that you live in, or you can't boast about the school that you send your children to because it's so expensive, you literally boast about how much money you spend on medical aid and how sick you are. Oh, I've got stage 4 cancer. It's terrible. So there was firstly no limit to the amount of arrogance and pride with regards to who they thought they were and what they thought of themselves, and I'm from this family and our family's got lots of money, and I'm from this tribe and my lineage is like this, and all these things are pointed out because it's something that should be foreign to Islam. As the poet said with regards to Mahmud Ghaznawi and his slave Ayaz, "Ek saf mein khada tha Mahmud Ayaz, na koi banda raha na koi banda nawaz." The king and the slave were standing in the same saf. In Islam, there was no master and there was no slave anymore. So we're all equal in terms of that. And this is one of the most beautiful things that Islam brought, equality. It didn't mean that if you're a slave now you were freed from slavery. You stayed a slave. But in terms of human rights, in terms of treatment, in terms of being considered for your feelings as well and for who you as a human being and being looked after, everybody was equal in that sense. And you as a free person from whichever tribe you were from, let's say you were a Qurayshi, had no right to walk into the masjid and pull a slave out the first off because you were from the Quraysh tribe and he was just a slave because he got there first. Everybody has their rights. A second point to note is that the Arabs were obsessed with eloquent speech and purity of language. And this is extremely significant because with the Quran, they were absolutely gobsmacked because nobody could speak that kind of Arabic. Right? No matter how eloquent and good they were at poetry, no matter how amazing, in fact they had the Sab'a Mu'allaqa, right? Poems, 7 poems that were regarded as the best poetry in the history of the Arab civilization or Arab nation. And they had those poems hung up around and in the Kaaba for people to see, as a kind of a challenge that if anybody's got a better poem, then bring it and take mine down. And those poems are even taught in the universities today for their eloquence and for their, the way they explain things, and for the imagery that is used and the different types of metaphors and similes. But a Sahabi came with the Quran and he literally just put Surah Kawthar on the Kaaba, and they were shocked, completely dumbfounded, no way that they could beat it, right? Another very important thing to note is that women were treated like merchandise. You could literally inherit your stepmothers. So when I say stepmothers, in Arab society as well, prior to Islam, a man could marry as many women as he wanted, right? Regardless of whether he could fulfill their rights or look after them or not, a man could marry any amount of women as he wanted. And when Islam came, it restricted that to 4. Why 4? What the wisdom behind it is, it's not of consequence to us. What is of consequence is that it shows us the disparity and the extent to which Arab society was overstepping normal limits in terms of their behavior and their customs and practices. So your father was married to 15 women, your mother's one of them. When your father passes away, you could inherit all 14 your stepmothers. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even revealed a verse that if you cannot sleep with a woman that your father had slept with, because that was also something that was done. I inherited my stepmother, so now she's mine, Marriage also took on many different strange forms, and divorce also took on many different strange forms. Men were always allowed to take a wife back, no matter how many times he divorced her and how many times he chased her away, or how many times they split up for whatever reason. And Islam came to limit that as well. There was constant war, so it's like almost the nation was in a constant state of PTSD, and as much as there was this kind of moral decadence, and literacy was almost down to 0%. People went on only what they could speak. The Arab nation in general was known for their intelligence, known for their generosity, their bravery. Like nobody could deny that. And I want to just draw your attention to 3 more points, and then we can conclude our lesson. They loved freedom. They could not tolerate subjugation. And this is why nobody had the guts to go and face them and take over. Truthfulness and keeping their promise and their honesty, that was like, the phrase of a man is his word. And patience during hard times, commitment to each other and family. And when they had beautiful quality of when they had the opportunity to take revenge, they would show mercy. We pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us understanding that we could appreciate these qualities and imbibe them. And I hope that I was able to shed some light on what Arab society was like prior to the birth of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. In our next lesson, inshallah, we will discuss that. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Subhanallah bihamdih. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.
بحمد ربي يبدأ المنيرة ثم الصلاة والسلام السيرة على نبي اسمه محمد أبوه عبد الله منه مفرد.